Sure. So my name is Adam Hohl, and I began employment with the city back in early 2020, which I say just for context of this project. I know there was a lot of work, a lot of discussions, a lot of consideration that went into the removal of Confederate monuments before 2020. The commission for the removal of the monuments on Monument Avenue. Really, my role came into play with starting in 2020 and up until today. But in 2020, I started as a management analyst with the city's operations portfolio. Today, I'm a policy advisor, still with the operations portfolio. But as I started my role with the city, the removal of Confederate monuments, I'll be very honest, was not on the initial task list or things that I was responsible for coming into my job. But as many people know, 2020, things changed very rapidly with COVID-19, with other events that unfolded that year. And so very quickly my role and my responsibilities with the city changed, and supporting with the Confederate Monument Removal Project was something that was assigned to me, and something that I'm still very proud to have supported with. My exact role in the project is a little bit difficult to define. It evolved over time, but in short, I supported with a lot of the coordination and collaboration of pulling together city stakeholders early in the process, helping to review and provide recommendations based on some of the legislation that had been passed by the General Assembly, allowing localities to remove monuments to the lost cause, starting July 1st of 2020, and also working with city staff to obtain some of the necessary approvals and planning review processes, going through the city's planning commission, commission of architectural review, urban design committee, and city council. And for AP Hill, to remove that statue, there were some even more special and unique considerations, such as working with the Richmond Circuit Court, working with a funeral home, because the remains of AP Hill were buried within the statue. So all that to say, over the last several years, from 2020 up until today, almost in August of 2024, my role has changed and evolved, and I've done a lot of different things as part of this project. I will say, though, from the onset, and really where my role came into play significantly throughout, was ensuring that everything that the city did was by the book as much as possible. We were very careful to dot our I's, cross our T's, make sure that everything that we did, we were obtaining the necessary approvals throughout the process, because the last thing that any of us wanted was for, due to some misstep or mistake, some action of removing these statues to be challenged in one way or another, and for the city to have to re-erect or replace some of these statues back where they previously were. So that was a big part of my role, was just making sure that throughout everything that we were doing it the correct way by the book. All that to say, this entire project was really driven under the leadership of the mayor, of the chief administrative officer, the deputy chief administrative officer for operations, as well as really close involvement with the parks department, these procurement department, the planning department, city attorney's office, not to mention external partners such as Devon Henry. So all that to say, there was a very large team effort. I don't want my role to sound overinflated as part of this. I was really just one member of the much larger team who participated in this. Well, as mentioned, it was part of my role and part of my job as a city employee. Beyond that, though, originally I'm from the Midwest, which the Midwest is, of course, it's challenges of its own. But something that still sticks with me, the first time I visited Richmond in 2018, and then when my wife and I moved here in 2019, it was incredibly bizarre to see in a progressive city like Richmond not just one monument or statue to the Confederacy, but an entire avenue littered with them. and throughout the rest of the city. And so it's always that perception of when we first arrived here and saw them, and how weird and unusual and terrible that was to see them. It just still sticks with me. I think the events of 2020 and the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd, Richmond really called for and demanded the immediate removal of these legacies of the Confederacy. And it just further illustrated that Richmond needed and did come to that decision that enough was enough, and those statues and those monuments, legacies to the lost cause, needed to come down, and that was something that I was really proud to play at least a small role in. In addition to, I guess, my role as a public servant, I do feel like day in and day out we owe it to residents of Richmond and other stakeholders to carry out their will and carry out what it is that they're asking their city to do. And again, I think the events of 2020 and a lot of what had led up to that point was the city wanted these statues down, and so as a public servant, I also felt it part of my duty to play a small role in carrying out that will. That the city took to remove the monuments. Again, I can't speak to much specifically prior to 2020, just because my role started in 2020. But the General Assembly, of course, took action in 2020 to allow localities to remove monuments to the lost cause. Previously to that, the City of Richmond legally, under Virginia state law, was not allowed to do that. And that law was set to go into effect July 1st of 2020. So the city, of course, had that in mind, had planning and conversations ongoing, but unknown at the time, of course, was the impact of the murder of George Floyd in May of 2020, and how that would really expedite and hasten the need to remove these monuments to the Confederacy much more quickly than initially planned. So on July 1st, 2020, the mayor authorized an emergency removal of the statues themselves. And that was in the midst of a lot of civil unrest that was ongoing throughout the country, not just Richmond, and in some cases where some of the civil demonstrations were forcibly pulling down statues, and in an effort to avoid anyone being hurt or worse from that action, the mayor made the decision to have them removed proactively to avoid any sort of mishaps like that. So beginning immediately on July 1st, 2020, and over the coming days, the city began removal of the statues themselves. Now this is just generally the top part of the monument. It wasn't the base or the stonework or the pedestals, but at least removing the portions of the monuments that could potentially cause damage or harm to some of the activists and others that were gathering around them. In August of 2020, City Council passed a resolution that allowed or called for the removal of the Confederate monuments in the City of Richmond. And then the following year, City Council passed a separate resolution which established a process for the disposition of the monuments. So City Council essentially, through those two resolutions, expressed their will to have the statues removed, and then established a process for what the city would do with them once they were removed, which could include transferring ownership and whatever it was that City Council decided they would like to do with them. In the meantime, we were really working on what the removal plans were for those monuments. So ultimately the intent and what we were working toward was planning for how to remove the stones, remove the bases, remove the pedestals in an organized inventory manner. And so, and once removed, provide some interim or temporary restoration of those spaces replanting grass or planting other plants or trees, or in some cases removing curbing and restoring a traffic intersection. So all of that planning work is going on for once these statues and monuments are fully removed, what then? The removal plans that we worked on in coordination with many city departments ultimately went through a few different city council bodies, including the Commission of Architectural Review for those monuments that were located in the City Old and Historic District, the City Planning Commission, and even City Council. And all of that work generally happened in the spring of 2021. And we worked closely with an expert to advise the city and Team Henry, who performed the actual removal work, Paul Di Pasquale, to advise us on the best and safest way in order to remove those stones and pedestals and remaining assets of the monuments. The Robert E. Lee statue, which was originally owned by the Commonwealth of Virginia and subsequently removed by the Commonwealth of Virginia, was donated to the city in 2022, January of 2022. That same month, City Council took the action to donate all of the Confederate statues that had previously been removed, in addition to the Robert E. Lee statue, to the Black History Museum. So going back to the resolution that they had taken in 2021 to establish a process for the disposition, ultimately, through that process, they determined that they would transfer by donation all of the statues and stonework to the Black History Museum of Virginia. Now, the final statue to be removed was A.P. Hill, and again, because A.P. Hill's remains were located within the statue, that statue was left untouched, even through the emergency removal, through all the other removals of the other pedestals and bases. A.P. Hill, we wanted to work very closely with the descendants of A.P. Hill, as well as petitioning the Richmond Circuit Court in order to allow for the respectful reinterment of A.P. Hill's remains, and ensure that we had all of that worked out prior to removing the statue and removing the stonework. But ultimately, we did go through all of those processes, and in late 2022, we were able to remove the A.P. Hill statue and reinter the remains in Culpeper, Virginia. Today, the statues remain the property of the Black History Museum. They are, for the most part, they're all stored in safe and secure locations. Together, the only statue that is not with the rest right now is Jefferson Davis, which is at the Valentine Museum on display currently. But otherwise, they are all still within the ownership of the Black History Museum and stored for whatever future use the Black History Museum may decide for them. I think it's tough to look back over the last several years and pinpoint each and every one of them, but I think just in general, navigating uncharted territory through the midst of COVID-19 and the city not being used to telework and needing to coordinate a lot of this work in a COVID-19 environment, the events of 2020 with some civil unrest and activist activity. There's just a lot of unknowns. It was at times a chaotic and scary environment. And the act of removing these statues, well, I think is largely the vast majority of Richmonders were demanding and calling for, it had been for years and years. There was still some opposition and some that came out with strong, loud voices telling us that we cannot and should not and will not remove those statues and monuments to the lost cause. And so there were challenges, but at the same time, I think what we did was the right, certainly not the easy thing to do, but it was the right thing to do. Public input and public engagement is always important in everything that the city does. We work for the residents and other stakeholders in the city, so it is always first and foremost in what we do and how we do it and why we do it. Remember that City Council, with their resolution in 2020, passed the intent to remove the statues and the monuments. And so throughout all of our subsequent public engagement opportunities, going through the city's planning commission, commission of architectural review, city council meetings, each one of those settings had public engagement session, and sometimes they lasted hours and hours of people would be lined up out the door speaking in favor of or in opposition to what it was that we were doing. And we listened. We did listen. But ultimately the will of city council and in turn the will of Richmond residents was heard loud and clear that the statues and the monuments to the Confederacy needed to be removed, and that's what we did. I have seen some really, really incredible ideas and implementation of just that through working with our partners and community-based organizations. The ones that come to mind, again, working closely with the Black History Museum on this project. Another one that I know we're all very excited about is working with the Chaco project down in Richmond's Chaco Bottom and retelling the story and the history of what happened in that space. There's a lot of work ongoing, and I think we're all excited to see what will come of that over the next few years with the Chaco Interpretive Center, the campus, the slave trail. There's just so many things that can be done, and I think as much as we're able to, as a city, work with some of those partner and community-based organizations to, as you mentioned, reclaim and tell the story of the history of what actually happened in those spaces, the better we all are. I oftentimes think about the decisions that past government workers, past local government workers made and how they're viewed today, and in turn the actions that we're taking today, how they may be viewed in the future. And I think that as much as we are able to continue to look at what we're doing and why we're doing it and who we're doing it for, not necessarily to appease the current environment or what it is that short-term gains or wins or taking the easy option out, but really doing things for the right reasons to lift up the people that need to be lifted up, to empower the people that need to be empowered. And that's why we're doing this. That's why we did this project, and I hope that, at least through my role as I continue to work for the City of Richmond, I hope that I can continue to build upon that work, build upon that framework, and ensure that everything that we're leaving behind as part of this project and other projects is it's done for the right reasons, done for the right frame of mind, and leaving a lasting legacy. As we're discussing some of the city departments and agencies that participated in this and the general removal process, one thing I failed to mention was sort of where we are today, and that's telling this story, and that's something that we've been discussing as part of this project, and always knew that this would sort of be I wouldn't say the end of the story. I think there's still some story left to be written, but working closely with the Richmond Public Library to document and archive and really ensure that what we've done and why we've done it is available to the public, available to the residents of Richmond into the future, I think is so incredibly important. So I appreciate Richmond Public Library for agreeing to support and help in this project.